Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Wednesday, the 8th of November, comes to you from a very wet and rainy London. And we start by looking at time horizon. I get asked all the time what charts I'm looking at, what's the view. Without knowing the time horizon, we can't have a meaningful discussion about the charts. So typically, I'm looking at a daily chart for the medium term. I'm thinking weeks ahead, and I'm looking back months on the daily chart in order to make that decision as to what's going to happen weeks ahead. And then on the short term, I'm using a 60-minute hourly chart to predict days ahead, and we're just looking back weeks. And then on the long term, I'm looking at weekly charts, thinking months ahead, and I'm looking back years. And then I can go ultra short down to 1-minute charts, and that's where I'm thinking about what's going to happen the next hour or so. So the easy way to remember this is that days means weeks means months, hours means days, minutes means hours. And so that's the really important thing about just understanding your time horizon. So really, that is well worth remembering. So when I look at charts, I'm looking at a daily chart and a 60-minute chart. And actually in my charts here, it says medium term and short term. So I know what I'm looking at. The system already knows the time frame and therefore the time horizon of the chart. And so on the Nasdaq recently, we had this downside target activated. Remember, this is derived from the point and figure target, but it projects forward into the future. But we've had this very dramatic move in the Nasdaq. Now, we did have a small upside target for the Nasdaq. The S&P mini did give more targets. And we've really come back to this resistance point, the previous high that we saw in October. So the key thing is that counter trend moves can be very dramatic, and that's what we've seen this past week or so with the Nasdaq. But the interesting thing is this setting us up for another move lower? Remembering the Dow theory, the lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low. Failure to make a new high is as good as a lower high, realistically. And we are just testing the cloud at the moment. We want to see whether we can hold this level. So that's going to be really interesting. And looking at the futures today, little change. If we look at the S&P E-mini, we see here the reaction. We're not above the cloud here, although the 60-minute chart is looking very strong indeed, but maybe we're just running out of steam. Watch this 60-minute cloud for a move below there. And if we look at the Nasdaq future, we see a very similar picture, of course. And again, it's just going to be a case of watching for any downside target kicking in. Now, looking at the FTSE, the future in the UK, we see here the downside target already kicking in this morning on this. This was activated yesterday, a downside target 2% lower. This orange one is an unactivated target. We need a new high to activate that. So at the moment, this is an orange for a traffic light of maybe this target will be activated, but we need to move over 1783, 1784 to activate that. So that's going to be really quite key. 7784, sorry. And then these downside targets still dominating there on the daily. And we look at the other markets. We can actually look at, first of all, look at the DAX in Germany. We'll look at the future. Really clear these downside targets, and again this new downside target activated. So we may have seen this rise in markets in the short term bullish, but the medium term trend is still below the cloud bearish, and we've just activated a new downside target. So really quite interesting seeing that there. Looking at the CAC 40 in Paris, similar picture here, no surprises there. Downside target there. Again, waiting for an upside target to be activated, but for the moment that picture is really one of bearish medium term. This is the Japanese market. This was the upside target thrust in May activated. We didn't quite get there on the target, and now we're waiting to see if we activate this downside target. We've set the thrust, but it needs to move a unit below there, 0.5% on the daily, to activate that. So that's really quite key. And looking at some of the other markets, with China down slightly today. Again, downside targets, a little mini upside target that we're playing for at the moment on the short-term chart. And in India, if we look at the Sensex, we've got these big upside targets still there, and this little mini upside target met. But at the moment, we, like most other equity markets, we are seeing a sell-off. And the same is true with the Aussie market. We've seen quite a sharp reversal there. That's a counter trend move, but we are below the cloud with these downside targets hanging over us. So equity markets Had a very strong week last week, but it'll be very interesting to see if we can go higher and activate new upside targets. European and Asian markets suggest we're already pulling back. So let's see what happens in the US when we open later today. We'll look at the energy mix in a minute, but looking at some of the soft commodities, this is wheat. So really clear train tracks, downside targets here. A little counter trend move on the short-term chart, so that's quite key. Medium-term downside, short-term upside, and that's really interesting. And corn is an even similar picture, really clear. Lots of downward selling thrusts generating downside targets, 21, 26, 30, 36% lower. Lots of downside pressure there. A short-term move, but not enough to activate the upside. And again, another target here, 2.6% lower, so really key. Gold, that's been an interesting one of late, just struggling to get above that 2,000 level and hold it. We're waiting to see if we activate this downside target. A move below 1958 would do that, and that would activate us back below 1900. So that would be really quite key. Strong resistance at 2000. We need to make new highs above 2072. So that's really quite key there. Taking a look at US 10-year yields, they've had a better time where we're pulling back on the bonds. Again, we've got this little mini upside target not yet activated. So that's going to be quite key there on bond markets. Will we activate that? And that's going to be interesting. We've pulled back there. And so that's really waiting to see what happens there. But of course, these bigger targets here were activated, and we still do have a very big upside target to 10.5% on US bond yields, albeit it is worth remembering, albeit in 2028. That's the thing about long term. We're thinking a long way ahead. Taking a look at some of the tech stocks, Apple, we've seen sharp recoveries in tech this week. It's been really quite interesting, but we do still have these downside targets on Apple. They're in place, and we just can't ignore the fact that they're there. And equally, we've got this new upside target. And looking at Microsoft, that's certainly looking better as well. But again, this counter trend move, is that enough? Now, Microsoft looking very strong, nudging new all-time highs, having met these short-term upside targets. And in fact, some of my tech stocks, I've been making decisions as to whether to hold or to sell. I'm watching, this is actually one of my stocks, I've hidden the name on it, so I'm not making a recommendation. Here I've got these strong upside targets still, waiting to see which of these unactivated targets play out. Encouraging to see a target here of 7% upside on the short-term chart, so I'm hanging in there on this stock, but I have sold quite a lot of my tech stocks on the basis of those new downside targets. Here's one, another chart from scanning in the US market, great train tax, another 10% upside. Will we see the downside? What you want to be looking for is these train tracks, these upside targets, so really key there. Now back to the energy mix. We'll take a quick look here. So we start by looking at Brent Crude. Here we go to Brent Crude on the energy mix. So first of all, we've got the Brent targets. Strong upside for Brent in the long run. Really big, strong targets. Waiting for this one to be activated. Train tracks, but we've got these shorter term downside targets, and they're showing through on the daily chart. So we're seeing that downside target met. We've got another one as low as $66, and we have moved back below the cloud, and we are waiting for this one on the 60-minute chart to activate to $73. So really quite interesting to watch there. Taking a look at emissions, this has been really fascinating. The emissions train tracks just cannot be ignored. This is the last few months there, last few weeks there on emissions. This is the short-term chart. Remember, I'm thinking days ahead, and we've nearly met that target. 74.70 was given back at 78.50, another 4 euros lower. So that's really quite key there on emissions as well, and interesting to just see those targets playing out. And of course, if you're trading emissions, you'll be wanting to look at the 1-minute chart. And here we see the targets on the 1-minute chart. This is the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 6th, and 7th, 8th of November. This is just the last week. Trading emissions, these are the targets. You really can't ignore them. And the same true of German power. Look at the targets here. We can't ignore those either. So, and you can run these targets on gas, on power, whatever markets you're trading. You want to be looking at the 60-minute charts, and if you're very short term, the 1-minute charts. That's it for today. Remember to keep a good eye on these targets and your time horizon. Until tomorrow, happy charting. Bye for now.